Can you guys hear me? Okay, you can still hear me. Excellent. So we're going to get started. It's 2:30. Thank you so much for being here. My name's Allyson Gunsallus. I'm the managing director for the Yosemite Climbing Association. I've studied corporate social responsibility, and I actually have a master's in global business law. I'm so dedicated to our industry, to all of you volunteers, to this cause. And last year was the first year I hosted a panel. My hope is that we can develop our thinking so we're attacking environmental issues prospectively before our impact as outdoor recreationalists becomes so big that the problem requires a bigger solution. So this panel is about responsible consumerism and how we can make wise choices with our dollars. You probably all have seen a lot of advertisements about from different companies with different responsible production and manufacturing processes. We also have, as you know, Facelift has corporate sponsors, so there's quite a bit of support of grassroots efforts that the outdoor retailers give outside of their commercial endeavors. The idea here is to kind of explore what is most important and how we can support the companies that are most aligned with our values when it comes to environmental sustainability. So to my left, I have a wonderful panel, and I'm so grateful for them to be here. If you want to give them a round of applause, feel free.
Nice applause before we even say anything.
I'm getting you guys stoked, right? Everybody's happy you're here. So I've got Tommy Caldwell, Eric Raymond from the North Face, and Brendan McManus from Patagonia Wornwear. I've asked them to give just a little bit of an idea of why they're excited about the connections that they have to the industry, especially as they relate to sustainability and environmental causes. So Tommy, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll just do a little intro. Most people know me as a professional rock climber, which they think that means I just get paid to go climb steep rocks, which is kind of part of it. But it's actually incredibly diverse, freelancey type job. I'm really, really heavily involved in the marketing of these companies, obviously, but I also do a ton of product development, so I have to learn about that all the way down to the science of fabrics and things like that. And then I'm also an environmental activist for Patagonia specifically. So, I have to kind of speak out about the good things that company is trying to do, and as well as write articles. And yeah, so it's a really diverse job. So that's kind of just the fact that everybody thinks we just pull on small holds and that's about it. It's not really true.
Hey, I'm Eric Raymond. I'm the Director of Social Impact and Advocacy at the North Face. That basically means I oversee all of our advocacy, which is really driven by our values, of which climate change and environmental sustainability is one of them. And then the rest of it is focused on our Explore Fund, which is how we sort of use our company and our resources to give back to the outdoors. And so that kind of covers everything you can imagine, from removing barriers to people getting outside to encouraging sustainability, encouraging participation.
Did you say removing barriers?
Not removing bear's ears.
I have my Bears Ears t-shirt.
Nice. Hey, I'm Brendan McManus, and I've worked for Patagonia for over 10 years, and I've been working for Wornwear for since about January of this year, doing tours and just doing our best to keep clothes out of landfill and keep them in use as long as we can. And I'm doing repairs myself on the truck, but I'm also planning tours and planning events and just getting out there in the communities who, might need to know that or already know that, and we kind of share that as we drive around in our cool wooden truck.
So my first question is related to the number of choices that consumers have. So as it's almost trendy at this point for companies to advertise their sustainable practices and their devotion to social and environmental causes, which is great. I mean, as far as trends go, that's wonderful. I'm wondering if you guys could tell us what you are most excited about and give an idea of kind of the wide spectrum of sustainable practices and social and environmental cause commitment.
Sure, I'll take this one. So Wornwear kind of started out as a blog, and we kind of wanted to share stories of people who are already fixing their own clothes. And Patagonia has been in the repair industry since I think mid '90s. We opened our first repair center in Reno, and we decided to kind of take that on the road and repair people's clothes, and not only do Patagonia clothing, but pretty much anything we could possibly fix using our sewing machines and our skills and whatever time we have to just keep stuff in use. But it kind of seems to be taking off as more of a business itself, and Patagonia is really kind of going all hands in on the Wornwear side of things. So not only are we out there repairing clothes, but we're now making clothes out of our old clothes. So we have this line that's coming out called Recrafted, and we're taking about 3 to 6 old jackets that are kind of in this limbo stage that, if we can't recycle them, or if, we can't, reuse them somehow or resell them through sales, we're cutting those up into panels and making new jackets out of old jackets. And beyond that, you can go to wornwear.com and you can see that we have a business where we're rebuying the jackets that people bring in that they're not using anymore. You can take them into a Patagonia store. We'll give you a little bit of credit, and we'll wash it and resell it on wornwear.com. And that's just kind of how Patagonia is doing their part to not kind of reduce the consumerism and keep everything we can out of landfill. As Yvonne said, the best jacket you can buy is one that already exists. So.
Have you guys heard of fast fashion? So fast fashion, have you heard of fast fashion,
Yes.
Brendan? You want to talk about it a little bit?
Sure. I could start. Who's got a piece of clothing here that they're kind of attached to, or they've done, maybe traveled the world or done something? What do you have?
An old Patagonia down jacket.
Patagonia down jacket.
Late 80s.
Oh, I did. I saw that one. It's very cool. First edition. Beautiful jacket. Do you remember how much you paid for that jacket?
I have no idea.
No idea. But you still have it.
I still have it, yeah.
I
still use it.
Would you trade it in for that same amount of money?
No.
You keep it for the stories that you could share with that jacket.
I checked the box saying send it back if you can't fix it.
Very cool. So we try and keep that jacket in use as long as we can, whereas the fashion industry and the clothing industry is growing so rapidly and so massively, and it's a huge impact on the environment. There's so much energy and water going into the clothes that we make, and with these fads that are coming in, you kind of want to match that with, magazines are coming out like, oh, I want to look like this. Might just throw away these clothes and buy some new ones, and like a salesman might be wearing a nice suit, and he closes a deal and he's like, oh, this suit's garbage, I'm gonna go buy a new suit because it's a little more expensive, or that's just an example, but essentially there's a mentality there that's pretty detrimental to
And it
to our
creates
environment.
a lot of waste.
Yeah,
a lot of
huge,
waste that
huge waste.
takes a long time to biodegrade, or maybe doesn't. So
Yeah, I wrote down the stat that I can't memorize it at the moment, but if you wear a jacket for 9 extra months, you're reducing 20% carbon dioxide, 22% waste, and 33% water.
thank you. Awesome.
And that's if you're just one item of clothing on
So,
average.
Great. Eric,
Yeah.
what are you excited about?
I think so I'm going to talk mostly about stuff that I know that I've worked on at the North Face. There's a bunch of exciting stuff. The first one I think is important is just the increasing availability of recycled materials. Recycled polyester has been around for a long time, recycled nylon, but now we're getting to see and getting easier access to things like recycled cotton, recycled down. We just introduced our first line of recycled down jackets, and so that's where we take down from old products, beds, pillows, whatever, we clean it, and then we use it in jackets to keep you warm. The other one, I think, is this idea of creating products that are actually benefiting the environment. And so we have a line of wool products that we use regenerative ranching practices, which are just sort of a complicated way of saying they manage the land and the ranching so that it's pulling more carbon out of the atmosphere than the process of creating that wool is putting into the atmosphere. So generally you call it like carbon positive because it's bringing carbon down, or you can call it carbon negative because it's pulling. Different ways to talk about it, but it's really exciting in terms of how we look at building products that are giving back to the planet. And then I think the third one that I want to talk about, which Warnware is a big part of, is this idea of re-commerce or reselling. And so we also have a store called the North Face Renewed, where we take jackets that are damaged or defective, we clean them, we fix them, and then we resell them. And so just kind of this idea of how long can we keep products in circulation is a really powerful one for removing the impacts of those products over the long term. So I think those are three really cool things that are happening. There's a ton of other stuff going on, but yeah, those are some of my favorites.
Yeah, you could go so many directions with this. But I'll pick a different. I feel like 10 years ago the outdoor industry was pretty greenwashy. You know, they were doing these environmentally, like recycling and doing these things because it looked good, and therefore it was good for business. But I'm seeing a shift now where they're going and auditing these companies are spending a lot of money to figure out all of their impacts and audit their entire supply chain and figure out how to reduce carbon that goes into the air, how to reduce waste, and really walking the walk in this pretty incredible way. Like one example that I like to cite is when Patagonia did this massive audit, they figured out that like 70% of their carbon that they were putting into the air as a company was at the mill level to make the fabrics. Actual mills that like weave the fabrics are hugely energy intensive. And then they figured out that there's only a handful of mills that were making the fabric, and they were in places like China. So then they went around and they worked with these companies to switch their power production from generally coal-powered fired power plants to solar. So a lot of times that just meant really filling out some paperwork, and they were able to hugely cut their carbon footprint, and it didn't even cost that much money actually to do that. I mean, the amount that it changed not only the mill for Patagonia, but these mills make fabric for everybody. So just really by looking into it is huge. Regenerative agriculture is also something that I'm very, very excited about. The idea that you could grow the cotton for this t-shirt right here and have it actually pull carbon out of the air instead of putting carbon in the air is pretty exciting. And if we do that for our food, that's gonna be a huge, huge thing. Yeah, I guess I'll just go with that for now.
Awesome. Yeah, the second question is a little bit more challenging. So with Facelift and the growth of Facelift, we are running into an issue where we start to wonder if our impact is offsetting all of the good that we're doing. So we have a lot of people who maybe are driving here alone in their cars and then driving back to wherever. So what's the impact of that? And then we were giving out these wonderful reusable water bottles, which reduces waste, which is great, but they're all packaged in plastic. So we start to wonder if the negative effects of the event at a certain point, as it gets bigger and bigger, outweigh the positive of coming together. There's so many soft benefits of coming together, having these discussions. So it's hard to understand, what the neutrality is there. But we want to look at all of our impacts and try to mitigate them. So for instance, we're looking into maybe a carbon offset program for people traveling here in their cars. That's something we might roll out in the future. What are some challenges that you guys within your brands, within your companies, you're talking about, the kind of the next challenges you'd like to find solutions to? You might not have solutions yet, But how are you kind of dealing with this idea of neutrality versus actually helping the environment and in all of your practices and your businesses?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think it's sort of like it's a fundamentally difficult thing when you're trying to figure out how to do good things in the world. Like all these events started giving away these stainless steel cups for beer or whatever. And I don't know the exact stats on that, but I think one of those stainless steel cups is more environmentally impactful than like something like 1,000.
Well, than paper, for sure.
Yeah, than paper. Yeah, like 1,000 of those like plastic ones. And so you're like, man, people would have to use those cups for a really long time. And how many people are actually going to do that? Everybody, when you try and look at your life, you have to really wrestle with these ideas. And really the only solution to that is to keep pressing forward on gathering the data, reading up on it, finding the science that kind of proves and disproves what is good and what is bad. And that's one way the industry is actually leading the charge in this way, is because they're putting resources to it in a way that most other big businesses aren't.
Do you want to help us?
Yeah, certainly. I think
with our audit.
I think that hooking up with companies that do big audits of their own company and learning from them is good. I haven't read any books on this topic, but there certainly must be some. Yeah.
Cool. I think so. One of the challenges you alluded to in your first question was just there's so much more attention on this stuff, so many more companies doing, sustainable practices or different things. It's hard for people to understand, what's meaningful. If somebody's doing one thing, what does that even mean for you as a person who's buying those products? And so transparency and just an understanding, you can get pretty nerdy about this stuff, and it's a lot to ask of somebody who just wants to buy a jacket or a hat or something like that. So I think that's a huge challenge. And so one of the ways we talk about it is just like, how can we share more of that information, and then how can we listen to what you guys are saying in terms of what you want to see. So if you guys are passionate about this stuff, you should definitely be telling the companies that you buy from and voting with your dollars and all of those small actions that you guys can take. The other piece, I think, inside that, all of these companies getting involved in environmental sustainability and making claims and getting better at not greenwashing. I think we talk about carbon offsets a little bit, and carbon offsets are a really, really deep and kind of, like I said, technical topic. But one of the things that I think is a challenge for at least our outdoor industry is kind of translating what that means for people and making sure that when people are talking about carbon offsets, they're not talking about a solution. Carbon offsets is, I guess maybe I should back up a little bit. Anybody, show of hands, know what carbon offsets are roughly? Oh yeah, that's actually pretty good. Cool. So I think, so at the North Face, we look at carbon offsets as kind of our last resort. They're kind of a Band-Aid, because if you think about them, you're not. Yeah, I can explain it. So, okay, a carbon offset is basically you go and let's say you make a jacket, and that takes a certain amount of energy. That energy gets burned up and goes into the air, usually as carbon dioxide. And what you can do is you can go into just different markets or different companies and purchase an equivalent amount of offsets, which is sort of let's see if I'm explaining this right, where you would purchase into, let's say, a forest, which is being managed so that forest will pull down that equivalent amount of carbon from the air.
Yeah, it's basically funding projects that reduce carbon dioxide in order to offset the carbon dioxide that's produced.
Yeah, so you're kind of trying to balance your impacts with like sucking some more down, requesting some more carbon down over here. And kind of one of the challenges to that is that you don't have to reduce any of your impacts if you're just buying carbon offsets. And so it kind of gives this false sense of security. And so the way that we look at it is really reducing absolutely everything we can down to the minimal impact. And then if there's anything like down here at the bottom that you can't really figure out, or we don't have a way to reduce yet, then we'll purchase an offset just to do that last little bit. But one thing that I would hope all of you all can take out of this is just to dive in and realize that some of that stuff is pretty deep. And if it sounds too good to be true, you might want to look a little bit closer.
Yeah. Well, there's just a couple points that when you were talking, I thought of this. For sustainable manufacturing and things like carbon offsets, one way to do better is to make sure that whatever you put your money into has a third-party certification besides just that company, that like the carbon offset company. They need to have somebody else like double checking and making sure that what they're telling people is actually true. And in manufacturing, like Edelrid does a really good job with this thing called Blue Sign. North Face uses it, Patagonia uses it, and basically it's a science-based company that looks at the impact of manufacturing and creates all these good practices and benchmarks that you have to adhere to if you're going to then call your product Blue Sign. And I think having that third party sort of like double checking the knot kind of thing is really, really important.
Yeah, well said. I think the challenges that we face in the outdoor industry is kind of we're already reaching an audience that might already agree with a lot of those messages that we're aiming to deliver. And I think Patagonia's done a really good job of kind of waiting for the right moment to strike. We're not putting ads in magazines or newspapers until there's kind of a moment to be had, whether there's like a maybe grand political disagreement or something, or public lands are threatened, and just kind of waiting for that moment to really, really reach out and hit a crowd that we might not be reaching already. I don't know if anyone saw the ad back in, I think it was 2011, Black Friday, when we released an ad that said, "Don't buy this jacket," and that created a really big stir. And why would a company who's selling jackets say, "No, don't buy this jacket"? And I think that had a really big impact on a lot of people that may not have seen that just walking into a store. But I think best way we can do that is, deliver that message is how we kind of display it. And whether that's through the merchandising in our retail stores, just like, walking by a window, and a lot of people walk by, every different kind of person might walk by a window and receive a message. And I think that's the hard thing is reaching a crowd that we don't. And I don't know if maybe for Facelift, you could somehow display all that trash that we've collected at the entrance of the park. It might look a little crazy, but that would be, the people from all over the world traveling here, and that would be a pretty strong message to deliver.
Make a big statement for sure. Like the Keep California Beautiful bags that you see on the side of the highway. That's actually a really good segue into my last question before we go into Q&A. So if anybody has some questions, time to think of them. I don't know if you all know this, but my real job is in the pharmaceutical industry. I work 9 to 5. I'm a contract manager for clinical trials. So trained as an attorney, but I work on the business side. And I will go into big meetings, in the Bay Area. Admins are bringing in pallets of plastic water bottles. I'm seeing that, people, outdoor recreationalists, because of our experience in the outdoors, we're committed to values that outside of this industry, people may not even know about. So, thinking forward, we've got some huge brands here. We've got Cliff Bar, the North Face, Patagonia, Edelrid, and how could these companies, which are, have a huge impact even outside of the outdoor industry, are well known by so many people, maybe do some outreach, outside of the outdoor industry and try to share some of these values that, we're all here, we're all having this conversation. Like, how do we, without alienating people, expand that conversation outside of this circle?
Yeah, good question. I think there's tons of ways. I mean, we just in our marketing and how we go out we're part of our business strategy is obviously trying to meet and sell things to new people. And so one of the ways that we do that is by like telling stories around our products. And so you were talking about, and we were talking about the single-use plastic and the waste that we discover and collect in the parks. We have a line of products called Bottle Source, where we actually take all of the single-use plastic that's collected in this park and 2 other national parks. We pick it up right outside the park, and we ship it, and we turn all that plastic into fiber, and we make T-shirts out of it, and we sell those T-shirts, and we take $1 from every one of those T-shirts, and we invest it back in sustainability projects in the park here. And so that's one way. The other thing I wanted to touch on, which I'm actually going to ask Tommy to talk more about, is how we use our brand and our voices in Washington, D.C., because I think we all as individuals can take action and like do our part. We as companies can take action and do our part with our sustainability efforts, but we also depend on our government to sort of set a lot of those standards and show us how, the right ways to do things. And Tommy and I were just in DC kind of doing that together around climate change. And so I think that's another really, really good place for us to use our voices, and one that we're doing a lot more and more over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I can riff on that a little bit. I mean, one step up that the outdoor industry has on basically any other industry is we've got the best stories, and therefore we kind of become the best storytellers. And for most of my life, I just thought, as climbers, we told stories to climbers. But it turns out other people are really excited to hear stories about climbers too, and so DC politicians are some of those people. And so when you go to these events that the outdoor industry is organizing, Climb the Hill, POW, what was the POW one called?
Protect
I
our
forget.
winners.
Yeah, Protect Our Winners did a couple of them in the last couple weeks. We make a splash, and people really want to talk to us, and so that's kind of that's like the top-down approach, going to the politicians first. But last night I talked about the kind of bottom-up approach, which is really just getting people out to vote. And making it fun. I mean, one thing that outdoor industry people really love, and this is a good example of that, this event right here, is we love to get together and party. And so we need to have voting parties. That's my idea. We got to throw some big voting parties. You got to have your little "I voted" sticker to get in the door. But I think that's what we need to do.
I'll be at your party. I think one thing that's really cool that Patagonia is doing is supporting the young activists of our retail part of the company, and what they'll do is they'll offer activism hours for the retail employees, which are a lot of young folks, which basically they can go out and speak their voice if there's anything in their community that is land's being threatened, or even if it's political. Patagonia is going to be paying these folks for a certain amount of hours, which you think, they should be out there doing it anyway, not getting paid for it, but sometimes a little difficult to get the young folks out there and speak their voice and stand for what they care for. And I think that's one way that Patagonia is kind of fighting that and trying to get their voice out to government. Yeah.
I think, we also personally can have those conversations with people maybe outside. I think about this, how to do it in a way that's respectful. Again, you don't want to shame anyone. It's a challenge. But thinking about it in advance and the words you're going to use and the demeanor you're going to have, it sometimes can give you that kind of warm platform to make a difference with one person that you're talking to. Thank you guys. I want to go to Q&A. Does anybody want to run the microphone for me?
Yeah. I got one other thing I want to not forget to talk about is creating avenues for businesses to do good, like 1% for the planet, B Corp. These are things that the outdoor industry is really leading the way in, and those are hugely impactful. And so big businesses can follow that, but we as individuals can go and sign up for 1% for the planet too, and give away 1% of our own money. So it's a good way.
Do you guys have anything else you want to close with?
I think just reiterating what you said, like we can all talk to people, we can all take action on our own. I think it's a really powerful thing. We exist, like my company, Patagonia, to serve you guys. So we'll listen to what you say and what you ask for.
Awesome. Yeah, Linda, please. Thank you. So Matt, oh, right here. We'll go and then Matt.
Just to dovetail on what Allyson was saying, my dad got us books years ago called Eco Economy, and you talked about what your companies are doing to create a better environment. For a lot of big businesses, it's the bottom line. So I applaud Subaru. When we bought a Subaru, they gave us a magazine, and they were sharing what they were doing to reduce their impact with other companies and with the park. Is there anything that you have learned in your practices that you'd be willing to share with other big businesses that would help their bottom line and encourage them? Because for them, a lot of them, it is truly about their shareholders.
You're going to need the mic back. It's a bigger job than you thought.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. I have a very specific example, which has been pretty fun to be a part of. So when we think about responsible supply chains and where we get materials, we all use a lot of down feathers to keep ourselves warm, these puffy coats that we all love. The North Face as a company got together and said, okay, we need to figure out how to make this as humane and as responsible as we can. And so we created a standard that we then gifted to a nonprofit that they then opened up to any company that wanted. And so as of that work, we now have, I think, about 90 different brands that are adhering to this standard, which is obviously certified and accredited and all of that, which is then allowing that kind of upfront work that we did to be leveraged across the industry. And so I think there's a lot of stuff that we do as outdoor industry brands. We call it pre-competitive, where we just kind of come together and we say, hey, there's an issue. One of them we're working through right now is around microfibers. And we identify these issues and we say, hey, what can we do together to solve this problem before we get into sort of our, like, my product's better than your product, back and forth.
I forgot what the question was, actually. Oh yeah. Yeah, so changing, like, one thing they can do is prove that the formula of doing business in a way that's better for the planet actually works. I think the outdoor industry is kind of like are proving that it works, and they write books about it, and then other companies read those books. I do a lot of corporate speaking events for giant corporations, and they all get together. These CEOs all read Let My People Go Surfing, from Yvon Chouinard. So the leaders need to step up to the plate, make sure that they really are genuinely doing the good things, and then tell those stories. And then also figuring out new ways to make things. Like a great Patagonia example is their wetsuits. They figured out how to make them out of trees instead of out of petroleum, and then they helped develop that technology, and then they just gave it to anybody else who wanted to use it for free. So being not selfish with your technologies and spreading it out when you come across something really great is huge.
We want to go to Matt?
Thank you so much for coming. This is really educational. Couple questions. One is, I have 3 kids, teenagers. What's really hot right now with teenagers is used clothing. They don't actually buy new clothing anymore. They all go to Goodwill, Crossroads, place like that. North Face and Patagonia, are you guys buying used clothing and slapping your label on it and making that cool among the more adult crowd?
Not so much from places like that, but we're buying our own clothes back, our own Patagonia clothes back. And like I said earlier, you can bring your clothes into the store if it's kind of sitting in the closet and it's just not being put to use. Like, someone's going to use that jacket. So we'll buy that back, wash it. And sounds like North Face doing a really similar thing now. And we'll sell it online at warmer.com. I think using other brands is maybe a more difficult thing to achieve. But if it's in the way of recycling that item, maybe it could be a little more like accomplishable, or more easily accomplished.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that Edelrid does is they started making these ropes out of the leftover fibers from the other rope manufacturers. So they make these cool ropes that look great because they take all the different leftover fibers and they build ropes. But then those ropes got so popular that they didn't have enough leftover fibers. So then they had to go out and start sourcing all the leftover fibers from all the other rope companies and building ropes out of those. So that's kind of like what you said, I suppose. I don't really think we could probably take other companies' clothing and slap our logos on them, though. That might get a little...
It's actually happening, yeah. Believe it or not,
Right.
There's a couple of sites online where it's just repurposed clothing.
Well, yeah, if your whole brand is about repurposing things, that kind of makes sense. But if you also make fresh product, I don't know, that seems slightly sketchy.
From what I've heard, there's no, like, you can buy used clothing. Like, for example, what people do in Santa Cruz is you go to Goodwill, you buy a plaid, a flannel, you cut the sleeves off and you mountain bike it. Because it's comfortable for mountain biking, so it's kind of making used clothing cool, which is a really good step in the right direction.
Yeah, love that. That's amazing.
Yeah, one last piece to add, I think. Luckily for us up here, our brands have been around a long time, and there's a lot of products that we've been making for decades that go through cycles. They're now like vintage North Face coats are really popular. And so if we were to, I think we just ride that and figure out how to continue. We've got a lifetime warranty, we repair stuff. And so we've got enough of a supply of our own product out there to just kind of keep that back in the market. I think that's where we're focused right now.
Okay, we've got one here, and then Steve.
Hey everyone, thank you for being on the panel today and being here helping sponsor this event. I want to say that in the beginning, but I'm just extremely skeptical of you guys. Like, what I'm hearing is that you know that your companies do a lot of harm. For instance, North Face, you guys are one label within a huge fast fashion empire called VF. So,
Is that a question?
no, it's not a question. I'm going to get to maybe a question, but I'm going to speak my piece first, So I'm just extremely skeptical that you guys can use your label within this conglomerate to kind of greenwash the rest of all that fast fashion trash that you guys make. And then number two, as an athlete, you guys are out there telling the greatest stories, which are really interesting stories. You guys make these cutesy documentaries that end up on YouTube about how you're hard men in the mountains. And then this is designed by your marketing department to create a halo effect, to sell consumers things that they don't need and won't use because your face is there in the mountains telling a wonderful story, So I'm just so skeptical. I hear you guys trying to lessen the harm you're doing, but you're just continuing to reproduce harm. And I think that's like the bottom line of this business. I think that there's other solutions to this huge problem that, school children all over the world are up in arms and outraged at all of us who are their elders right now,
I was trying to jump in there to stop the slaughter, but...
I mean, skepticism is absolutely a very, very important thing, and I appreciate the conversations like that. People are going to buy stuff, for sure, and getting people to not buy stuff is probably step one. But leading the way in making the stuff we buy better is going to be step two. And whenever you start to do environmental work, you get a huge uproar of people that call hypocrite. That's just part of it. And generally, I do appreciate that. But I think about this example of the American Civil War. The North went to war with the South, and they were still wearing cotton clothing. They're still wearing cotton clothing, and the fact that they're wearing cotton clothing didn't mean that they were hypocrites. They just knew they were part of a system that needed to be changed. So I look at the outdoor industry in that same way. Like we're flying on airplanes, but we realize the system is messed up right now. So at least we're doing the work to try and make it better.
Yeah, and I appreciate the skepticism as well. I mean, I think I would sort of push back on your point that VF owns fast fashion brands, because I don't think they do, but I do appreciate where you're coming from with that criticism. And I think skepticism is really healthy for us. I think it pushes transparency. It pushes us to release more and more information about where our products come from, how we source our materials, what those impacts are. And we've been doing that actually on our website. And so I would say dive into it, and like however you guys want to hold us accountable, we will be held accountable. And I think we're doing a bunch right now to hold ourselves accountable, and that's kind of what we're up here talking about. But there's always, more progress and more movement to be made, especially because we're businesses and we're working in the system that exists.
Yeah, appreciate the skepticism. Yeah, next question. I think we spend a lot of time doing that ourselves and practicing that ourselves in the company, and I think we're doing all this harm, and I think maybe the saddest thing to do would just be to stop, because we're such a vessel for the message. It is kind of weird because we're inside of it, but we can also raise awareness, through the stories and through the product and all that we're doing to kind of help reverse that and offset our carbon footprint.
I got a good example from someone just like you. The down was coming from ducks a while ago that Patagonia was using. It was coming from ducks that were being used for foie gras, which is like horrible for the ducks. And so Patagonia didn't know this was the case. And an environmentalist stepped up to the plate. They were very vocal. They started trash talking Patagonia and saying that they were doing this terrible thing. And so what we as a company did is we went and we stopped making down products for like a year completely. This also happened with wool. And we reanalyzed the entire supply chain and changed it and went back and figured out how to make down products again in a way that wasn't, so bad for the geese. So, I mean, there's a lot of things like that. I don't know the technical terms, but there's a lot of things like that going on. And so we're just doing our best,
Yeah, I mean, I think identifying problems and having conversations about them is the first step to finding solutions. You can either give up on everything completely, or we can say, like, hey, we want to go out in the mountains and have Gore-Tex and not die of hypothermia. How are we going to do this in a way that works better, rather than abandoning the whole system? We're not going to be able to abandon the whole system. So, we need to have these conversations. That's why I wanted to have the conversation, actually, because I struggle with it myself. So we have time for one last question, and I think I had called out Steve in the back there.
I'm curious if any of you are vegan and cruelty-free, which directly affects the environment and the other inhabitants of the planet.
I was a vegetarian for 5.5 years and was starting to have joint problems, so need to talk to someone about nutrition. Have recently started eating fish again.
Yeah, I mean, it started when I started researching environmental good practices. I pretty quickly decided to go vegetarian. So yeah, I'm a vegetarian. So I'm part way there.
Yeah. No, I'm not vegan, just to be clear.
Not vegan either. I remember one day I went vegetarian for a day, but my family was cooking a meal that had chicken in it, and I was like, I'm not gonna do it. I'm not gonna eat it. And I went to the trash can, and I'd eaten the salad, and I ate it around all the chicken, and I was about to throw it in the trash can. And I was like, wow, that's really wasteful. And then I think just from that day on, I was just very conscious about where my food was coming from, and whatever impact I've been making. I wasn't super radical about my diet, but I'm at least aware about where it's coming from.
I'm really glad you asked the question, though, because the food industry is another industry where we can ask those sorts of questions and try to make better choices. So, do you guys want to add anything else before we close it out? Okay, great. I don't really have any final thoughts. I think this was an amazing conversation. We really covered on a lot of what I've thought about, and I hope you guys will go out and continue the conversation. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.